Hey hockey player, in this video I'm going to be going over some basic tips so that you get the most out of your Edgework ladder. Now here we've got our complete ladder out on the ground, fully stretched out. First thing I want to mention is it doesn't happen too often, but sometimes these things can slide and get a little crooked or bent. You do want to make sure that it's nice and even before you start any set, because if that happens and it's crooked, your mind might be in the wrong place. You want to just be focused on your footwork, and if something's crooked, you may have perfect footwork but then still knock the ladder, and then once you've knocked the ladder, then the whole drill is kind of messed up from that point. So if you see any crooked here, which we don't have going on right now because it doesn't have to happen too often, then fix it before you start, because it's super simple. All you got to do is grab it here. You're going to see it really just like a belt. Fix it, good to go. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. The second thing I wanted to point out is the ladder's tricky. There's no two ways about it. Like when you're doing the crossover, when you're doing the icky shuffle, when you're doing your scissor hops, you're bound to touch it, right? And sometimes in the beginning, it can be a frustrating process. And just like when, I remember when I was learning how to drive manual for the first time, switching gears, I was constantly screwing up and I was getting mad at myself. And that can happen with the Edgework ladder, because if you kick it a bunch, then you have to set it back up. Kick it, set it back up, kick it, set. Look, avoid yourself that stress if that keeps happening, because at the very end of these, you're going to see open little triangles here, just like this, where you can stake that thing into the ground. So I recommend doing that actually, because it keeps it in place, keeps it perfect, and you avoid that frustration. I want you to enjoy training. I don't want you to be frustrated with it. So stake that thing in the ground, and then maybe once you get a little bit smoother, once you get a little bit more experience, you won't need to stake it down because you won't be touching it anymore. So just food for thought if you're running into some of that frustration. And with this speed ladder, I don't recommend keeping it out in the sun. Similar to the speed rings, the color can fade if you leave it out in the sun all the time, or the plastic, any kind of plastic can warp in the sun. And you can leave it out, of course, for your workouts. That's obvious. But I just don't stake this thing down to the ground in your backyard and then just leave it there all the time. It's not the way to treat this equipment. So when the equipment, you're done using it for the workout, it's time to wrap this thing up and put it in the bag. The easiest way to do that is like one of those accordion instruments, one of those big accordion instruments. And what you would essentially do is grab the side here and then just put this one perfectly beside it. Put this one perfectly beside it, right beside it, right beside it, right beside it, until we've got our accordion that we've perfectly put together, and then it can easily go in the bag. You want to do that accordion technique, because if you just kind of crumple this thing up and put it in the bag, first of all, it's probably not going to fit in the bag. Second of all, it's going to be all tangled up. And when you're ready to go, you're ready to train, you want to harness that moment. You don't want to wait, untie a bunch of tangles, and then try and get to your training. All right? So stake the thing in the ground, make sure it's nice and even, use the accordion technique, and get the most out of your ladder.